Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the first two event vehicles for this year's Festive Quest. Now, these vehicles have just been released today with the 5th stage of each respective vehicle type in the event. And the two vehicles are this one, the Su-85A. This vehicle is basically just a standard Soviet self-propelled gun, very similar to other self-propelled guns on the Soviet tech tree, such as the Su-76, only this is fitted with a slightly bigger 85mm cannon, which does pack quite a punch, as well as carrying very deadly APHE shells. Now, the second event vehicle is the MB.152C-1. This is a standard French fighter, effectively. Definitely more suited to boom and zoom tactics, but there is another aircraft very similar to this on the French tech tree. It does actually share the cockpit model with that other French fighter. The only issue is there's a few changes which Gaijin haven't taken into consideration, but I will speak about that a bit later in the video. One major difference with this and the other version is the rating change. I believe the previous tech tree variant is at 3.3, this is at 2.3, as well as the fact that instead of having only two 20mm cannons, this has two 20s and two 7.5mm machine guns. So a slight armament change as well. Well, anyway, now that we have gone through a brief description of what these vehicles are, let's go take a look at some gameplay. So please note, though, these vehicles have just come out today, so I've not had the most time to get gameplay, so there will be better videos on these vehicles separately in the future. But anyway, let's get started with the Su-85A. Alrighty, so now that we have some gameplay footage in the background, let's get right into the pros and cons of this vehicle. Now, first off, for a pro, the gun is very good. Now, as I said before, this is an 85mm cannon. In terms of when the vehicle is driving, it's a fairly stable gun. It does, of course, not have a stabilizer, so it will wobble a bit. But, you know, it's not too bad, I would say. In terms of shells, this can carry some pretty decent shells. It can, of course, carry that very good Russian APHE shell, which we see APHE shells on a lot of the Russian tanks, especially stuff like T-34s. Those shells are absolutely amazing. It also has APHE-BC, a ballistic capped version of the APHE. This has a few mil less penetration, but does carry a slightly higher chance of actually being able to fragment and kill the target. So I would say you might as well just take that. Obviously less pen, but you know, it's a lot more destructive, so you might as well take that. Other shells the gun can use do include HE rounds and APCR rounds. These rounds do have their uses, but I personally do not carry them. Basically, it's because there's no need to carry them. You know, I don't really think that there's enough situations in each game where you will need them. But nonetheless, the gun is an incredibly potent weapon, very, very useful, and it can actually knock out most of the vehicles it's going to face with one shot. Now, unfortunately, that is the only major pro I can think of when it comes to this vehicle. So let's get into the cons. First off, this is a very big piece of bait for aircraft. It is an open-top vehicle. Majority of your crew is in the open-top part of the tank, so any aircraft can swoop in and knock out your vehicle, which is very, very irritating. It's happened multiple times where I've been killed, even times where half of my crew, two of the people in the open top area, have been knocked out, meaning that I have to wait for someone to get on the gun, or I have to wait for parts to be repaired, and also my engine can be knocked out and I can be set on fire. So in terms of aircraft bait, it is pretty dire, and it is something where you will find a lot of the times you die, it will be from aircraft seeing you and diving in. And leading off from that, another con would definitely be the armour protection on this vehicle. It's not very good. I think that's a pretty basic way to say it. You can definitely tell this is a vehicle that is not designed to protect the crew. It is designed to carry a big gun and be able to knock things out. The armour is incredibly weak. In some places on the vehicle, even a 50 cal machine gun will go through majority of the armour, especially where around the gun, where most of the crew is, especially on the sides and the rear. That will not protect you from anything. The frontal plating, you can bounce. Sometimes shots will go through and not damage anything, just because they went straight through the vehicle, which is a bit confusing when you have a crew member where it goes through the crew member and only makes him yellow or red. Very confusing, but you know, it's Gaijin logic. I'm not going to I'm not going to try and change the way they do things, but nonetheless, the armor is it's not the best. Although, you know, you can sometimes get lucky for sure, but most of the time you will find you are being one-shotted, and one shot from an enemy tank will go in one side, explode, knock out your entire crew, and your vehicle is pretty much done for. And due to the weak armor, one thing that is really annoying me, especially with self-propelled gun-type vehicles in general, is the transmission being knocked out. It happens so often, you can't move, you're just sitting there, and the gun can only go a few degrees on each side. It's incredibly annoying, so that is something that will really annoy you when you're trying to use this vehicle. Now, the final con I really want to get into is the reverse speeds. It sucks, basically. It is very annoying, the reverse speed. But, you know, some vehicles have it. It's something you have to deal with. At least the forward drive speed's pretty decent. But it can go fairly fast forward, which is good for getting to bases and such and getting to good sniping positions. But, you know, the side-to-side turning as well as reverse is kind of sucky. So I wouldn't advise relying on that in a game. But, you know, it's a standard SPG, it's sort of the stuff you would expect, so not too much to worry. In terms of matchmaking, you will come across long-barreled Panzer IVs all the time. They will be the bane of your life, and especially today, I was seeing so many KV-1Bs. I would make the assumption that it's because people are using it to grind the event tasks. I did see a lot of them, and they're rather annoying as well, but, you know, nonetheless, the matchmaking's a bit sucky. It's at 4.0. You're going to face late Panzer IVs. You're going to face aircraft with 20mm cannons that are going to completely riddle you from above. But, you know, if you can play it right, definitely not a close-range vehicle. Play it long-range, sniper. You will have problems, but I think that's the best way to play it. At closer ranges, though, you can do pretty decent damage, I would say, on enemy vehicles. But at least if you want to play it safe and have the highest possibility of a good KD, long range is the way to go with the Su-85A. Well, now that we've talked about that, let's move in and have a talk about the MB.152C-1. Very interesting aircraft. I don't have really much experience with these sort of French aircraft. There is one in the tech tree, as I said before, but I've not played that much. So let's take a look at this thing and see what I think of it. So after I did a few games in Air RB, it did become rather apparent to me that this aircraft is far more fun of an event vehicle than the Su-85. The BR suits this really nicely, for one thing. It sits at a rating of 2.3, which means that the up-tier games, they can be a bit iffy. You can face some high-tier things, but you can certainly still perform very nicely in this airplane. At its rating at 2.3, it is a rather nicely performing airplane, and then the down-tier games are very fun with it. So I think the BR is a very nice flexible BR. You can get the sort of more challenging games, but you can still get very fun, kicked-back games where it's rather easy to club on the enemy aircraft. Now, another pro of this is the guns. So, for the most part, the heavy hitters that this aircraft carries are two 20mm cannons. They do, unfortunately, only have 60 rounds per gun, and they are rather fast firing, so do expect those rounds to be gone quickly. All it will take, though, is a bit of trigger discipline and keeping an eye on your ammunition amounts during the game, and you should be able to at least get a few enemy aircraft kills with that ammunition before it runs down. The secondary guns are two 7.5mm machine guns. They have quite a bit more ammunition, and obviously they're not going to be the most heavy-hitting guns in the game, but they're pretty decent. If you can put enough bullets into an enemy aircraft, you will kill it. So, you know, if you're in a big dogfight and there's enemies everywhere, and in this aircraft, let's just say you're likely not to be able to outrun them if you're facing, for example, Messerschmitt 109s. That's not an aircraft you're going to outrun. So if you have to keep going without the cannons, the machine guns can be useful. You can get pilot snipes, you can knock out engines, so I would say certainly give them a go. If you run out of your cannons, don't just try and run away. Now, another big pro of this aircraft, in my opinion, is also the turning. The maneuverability of the aircraft in general is pretty good. Unfortunately, the flaps are not really usable in dogfights and those sort of things because you only have landing flaps. So if you're much above 200 miles an hour, they will rip off, which obviously you don't want to happen in a dogfight. but even without them, the maneuverability is better than you would expect. You look at the aircraft and you're thinking, oh, fairly small wing, fairly small elevator area, it's likely not going to be very maneuverable. Surprisingly, that's not the case. It is a decently maneuverable aircraft. As you saw just then, I was able to keep on the tail of a Corsair. Of course, by no means is the Corsair an insanely maneuverable airplane, but it is still pretty decent. Now, of course, if you're in games facing, for example, either a Spitfire or maybe even Japanese Mitsubishi Zeros, do not try and outturn them. That's not going to go in your favour. But if you're fighting, for example, Messerschmitt 109s, definitely try and outturn them, because I'm pretty sure that with all variants of the 109 you'll be facing, you will actually be able to outturn them. And as you can see just here, using those machine guns despite my cannons running out, and I was actually able to set something on fire, which does actually in a bit give me the kill. So it does go to show that even though the cannons are obviously the preferred option for a gun to use, if they do run out, you can still be an effective fighter aircraft even without them. Now, going into a few more sort of cons of the aircraft. First off, the level flight speed. It can reach up to 300 miles an hour in level flight. Most of the time, you'll be maxing out, though, at about maybe 270, 280 miles an hour. So it's not exactly the fastest. At its tier, at 2.3, and even in a down tier, the speed is perfectly fine. It is not an issue. The issue of speed comes along when you are in an up-tier game and you're facing aircraft such as the Bf-109E3 and the E4, even the E7. They are a lot faster than you. So when you're sort of, I would say, look at the enemy aircraft you're going to be facing, work out which ones to be worried about. If you see a 109 a couple of miles out, and you know your gun ammo is low and you're probably not going to have a chance of facing them, I would say just run then. Go when you have the distance as an advantage. Don't wait until they're right on your tail, because you will not escape them. Now, the last thing to say before I end the video about this aircraft is the final con is the climb rate. It's kind of slow in terms of the climb rate. It climbs very heavily, although you will find that eventually, if you can maybe side climb and get above your enemies, it won't be a problem, effectively. But the climb rate is something I noticed. Climbing from takeoff, it is a rather heavy flying aircraft, but in terms of maneuverability, it's actually not that bad. But nonetheless, I would say that this is definitely the best of the two event vehicles. I found the actual aircraft far more enjoyable to play than the Su-85A. The Su-85A was challenging, to say the least. The lack of armour and the sort of, I would say, the risk of aircraft attacking was very difficult to deal with, but I was able to get some decent gameplay footage, so hopefully you guys did enjoy that and found it somewhat useful. Nonetheless, though, it is time to end the video, so thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please consider smashing that like button, maybe even subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.